What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video on what if Deku was transport danmachi. And I just want to say thank you guys so much for, well, I assume by the time this comes out, reaching 1,000 subscribers. This is a momentous occasion for, I believe, almost everyone. And all next week, there'll be double uploads every single day. You can guarantee it. A new what if's coming out. And there's also going to be an extra kind of video that's going to come out on either Monday or Friday, that it's not a what if, but it's based around my what ifs. Let's say that it's based around my what ifs. So let's jump into saying who joined the Discord. So I just want to shout out Creed Damien, Julius Captain, and Lord Zero. Thank you guys for joining the Discord. And if you guys want to join the Discord, go check out the description down below. Join it. There are plenty of people there. Chat, have fun. You get shout outs in the videos like this one. And also I'm eventually planning on starting a gaming channel. Yeah, I'm gonna let this cat out of the bag as well. And I plan to play games with my Discord guys and girls, whoever's on the Discord. Games including Duel Links, Among Us, that's really popular, and any other game, really, if I have the hardware to be able to manage it. I don't have a capture card, so I can't do anything console related, but I can play some games on my PC and some other stuff. So if you guys are hyped for that, go down in the comment section down below and message, I don't know, hyped. And thank you guys for hitting 1,000. I just want to say this once again. Now let's jump straight into this what if. Next morning when Deku woke up, he stood up away from the tree he was at. He looked around to see that the lake was right in front of him. Eventually, Izuku prepared himself. He got in a change of clothes and adopted more adventure-style gear. He still kept the same boots, but eventually ended up getting some light arm protection, thinking that he should probably take the advice Az had given him. I mean, not Az had given him, but he had given Eyes. Then he decided that, yeah, kind of take your own advice, bro. So he put on his armor and everything and began to meet up with the rest of the party. Deku was placed nearby the Vanguard party. He wasn't in the Vanguard party to be exact, but it was close by it. Close enough to where he could discuss with everyone that was inside the Vanguard party. Even Eyes and Bait, even though Bait tended to be a little bit more aggressive to Izuku, which Izuku found slightly annoying, mainly for the simplest reason that he'd never really done anything to Bait. Yet Bait always acted offensive against him, which it caused Izuku to want to act offensive back towards Bait. It was just a perpetuating cycle between Bait and Izuku. Eventually, Izuku and them all began to leave with the supporter and the rest of the party in towed. They started to venture down into deeper dungeons. Izuku has gone down to 21st floor with Eyes, while they were just doing a mini exploration during the day to have some fun. During that time, he had seen most of the monsters here, so it wasn't much of an issue. And he also had gotten used to the whole entire change of scenery, as Izuku put it. Eventually, Az led him down into, well, not Az. Eventually, the party got led down into the deeper section of the area. Deku was pretty excited. He hasn't really fought anything too strong, and the only time he was caught off guard was because he wasn't paying attention. He eventually kept walking deeper and deeper into the dungeon with the rest of the party. Most of the monsters were relatively taken out of quickly by Tion and Tiona and Bait and Eyes, Az herself. Eventually, they all got down to the floor 30. Now, floor 30 looked a little bit different than most of the other ones. It seemed to adopt more of a dead field than the previous forest I had later. Izuku knew that there was some dead zone biomes, but really didn't think much of it. They decided to host camp at this area. Izuku, somewhat thankful, somewhat not, because that means that hosting camp here would be a little bit more difficult than hosting camp anywhere else. Izuku eventually sat down and ate the porridge he was given. He really didn't care about the food. He knew he needed to eat, especially with the situation. Izuku almost laughed at himself, realizing how quickly he had adapted to his current surroundings. He started to think back to Oma and them, and wondered how everyone was doing there. He really didn't care, though. Well, not that he didn't care, it was more like he just really didn't know how to care because of the current situation over there. Seeing how he did not know it himself was kind of subpar, but more on that later. Eventually, Izuku ended up looking around, trying to see who and what could be of assistance, or could be in need of assistance. While walking around, he found that almost no one really was in need of an assistance, which kind of not really saddened Izuku, but caused him to feel kind of a little bit useless, to say the least. Eventually, Izuku ended up speaking with Eyes, and I said that as, my bad guys, I keep calling her Eyes because I read I-A-Z, and that's just Eyes, not As, but I'm pretty sure people in the comment section of my last video told me it was pronounced As and not Eyes. My bad. As responded saying that she really didn't need much help, and most of the things that she did need help with, she could probably do on her own in her own free time. Izuku sighed and ended up heading back to his own tent and prepared. Tomorrow they would be heading deeper. Izuku heard that there was another safety floor, like the one over on floor 18 down on floor 50. He had already known that floor 50 was a slightly more dangerous floor than any of the floors he had previously visited. Or, to be more accurate, Izuku rephrased, the floors prior to floor 50 were way more dangerous than any of the prior floors he visited, for multitude of reasons. The floors that Izuku hadn't visited yet exponentially got harder with each and every floor, almost like the dungeon itself did not want the personnel to travel deeper and deeper. Izuku kinda was wondering why there wasn't any more settlements deeper into the dungeon. He found Captain Finn and asked the small man why there wasn't any more civilizations down deeper in. Well, you see, Izuku, that the deeper down you go, the stronger the monsters get. That means the stronger the Avengers levels would need to be. But the issue with that means that people don't want to go into the dungeon. Simple enough. Think about it, kid. You think people want to be in this dungeon, this dark, gray, decrepit area? Izuku thought about it and realized, no, most people wouldn't. So then Izuku asked, what about like a supply area where adventurers could resupply and go even deeper into the dungeon itself? Kid, think about it for a second. That still requires people to be down in the dungeon the entire time. Even if they were paid a hefty sum, they still won't enter the dungeon to go that deep just to stand in one area. Not to mention, there isn't many adventurers that are even able to take down monsters at this level pretty efficiently. So guards wouldn't be that actual useful. They would be there, stand there, look pretty, and run away at the first sign of danger because they don't want their lives to be tarnished. Worst case scenario, they state that the town was just overflocked by a sea of monsters. Best case scenario, the entire area lives and no one dies. But as you can see, kid, neither of these end up in a good situation. Both these end up in a very bad situation because both of them causes someone to be in danger. Being in danger is not a good thing, kid. You understand this, right? Izuku said yes, he had already fought many life-threatening battles against opponents that were probably stronger than the ones most of the adventurers had even fought here. Izuku sighed, understanding that most personnel wouldn't want to enter it for very simple reasons. He'd already figured that most people didn't want to enter it, period, but really didn't understand why. The base aspect of entering the dungeon was nothing to be afraid of. Actually, on the contrary, it should actually be something that most people are proud of. So why? Why would personnel not like to go into the dungeon? Being able to hold out in the dungeon obviously causes issues for the persons themselves, but it doesn't make sense why the persons. Izuku eventually started to think of plans to implement sort of a supply depot. Even if he was the one that had to man it for the time being, he could easily see that being useful. Especially if they found out a way to set up a settlement on the 50th floor. The floor literally known for being a safe haven floor. The only two that have been discovered. Not to mention they didn't know how deep the dungeon goes. The furthest they made it was 54. And that was made there by, well, the Loki familiar and some other personnel. But those areas were extremely icy and very dangerous to head in there without the actual necessary protective gear. Izuku looked around, trying to see what areas he could implement. He started to think of things that were from his world and realized, well, a supply depot is probably an issue because they can't enter it without, well, sustaining multiple issues. I know it sounds stupid, but that's probably the case. So if he found a way to allow them to enter there without actually having issues themselves, that means that there shouldn't be a problem if any monster comes. But how to allow people to skip through the dungeon? So far, Izuku had known that there were some areas where people could mosey on through, or sneakily bypass a couple floors, shortcuts, if you would call them as such. So Izuku expected there to be more. But to his shock, no one seemed to know of any more shortcuts. When Izuku inquired, they just said there isn't any more, which bewildered Izuku again. How can it be that one of the most well-known aspects of the dungeon, being shortcuts, aren't well known? Maybe the case may be that the shortcuts aren't well known because they're just not found. Izuku figured he'll start exploring the deeper floors to get a better, more effective understanding of the entire situation, the entire area itself, to a higher degree, so if there was any more shortcuts, he could end up letting the other guild members know, and the other people know. This information would probably be at a very expensive price, but Izuku was willing to give it away for free. Simple enough. Eventually, Izuku met up with the rest of the party for dinner. They were all kind of wondering what Izuku had done, and Izuku had explained that he was just checking out around the area a bit. Most of the people were confused why Izuku was doing that, and Izuku then states, for the simplest reason that if a shortcut does exist, as we've seen a shortcut exist earlier on, and in video games shortcuts exist, so I don't understand why they wouldn't exist here. Video games? Finn looks at Izuku confusingly. Izuku kinda just realized he got caught up on his words and blurred out something from his own world, decided to cover it up saying, oh yeah, a video game. It's kind of like a magical item that allows you to control a character and play through a situation with magic. Huh. And is this from the country you're from? Oh, yeah, it's a very common thing in the country I'm from, Izuku said, trying to quickly smooth over his mistake that he had made. Then understanding, thanks to being with Loki-sama, understood that Izuku's past was a very mystifying one, to say the least. All he knows is that Loki-sama decided to take a vow not to speak of Deku's past unless if Izuku decided that it was time to say in front of someone else, or spoke about it to someone else. That also kind of confused Finn a bit. He'd known Loki-sama for quite a long time, and for her to take a vow on something, that means the information must be quite important. But just to take a vow on something, just to have the information sealed away? Finn couldn't understand why Loki-sama had decided to do that, but decided that this boy must be worth more than his own expense. Finn decided to put it in his own head. Eventually, while discussing everything else with the other party members, Izuku had slipped away. He decided that he would be exploring the lower floors again. Even to the digression of everyone else in the party, Izuku knew that he didn't have time to wait. He needed to understand everything. But Izuku also knew before heading in there, it'd probably be better suited to get used to his magical skill set. Izuku knew that magic exists, but he didn't know magic that well. He knew that magic kind of worked off of an incantation, words spoken to unleash the power of magic, and that magic also revolves around heroes and myths and fables or religious figures or people as such. For example, Izuku used All Might in a spell that required wind because of All Might's strength and his desire to protect people and be a hero that everyone can look upon and smile. So Izuku started to think of other things. He decided to try to use a very specific type of magic. He was thinking of all of his friends and decided to choose Uraraka because of her gravity-based magic. So Izuku decided to try to cast a spell on a rock to make it float or have zero gravity. Izuku picked up a small rock and said, "By the power of Uravity, I command you to lose your gravity." I know it's a horrible rhyme, but I couldn't think of anything better while I was writing down my script. I'm very sorry, guys. Suddenly, the rock began to lightly float, but Izuku felt very drained at even doing this lighter action. Izuku started to realize that magic does have like a requirement. It's not infinite. Even though Izuku knew that most of his abilities are heavily advanced, he had never experienced any magic before, and likewise really couldn't have the capability for understanding magic to a higher degree. His mana stores, to be accurate, was at 1 when he first came here. Luckily, through the use of Black Whip, his mana stores had increased. Not by much, but by enough to allow him to use some spells relatively easily. Izuku realized that gravity magic must be a very draining type of magic. Izuku, happy with his sudden discovery on that he can use gravity magic, left the area. He was trying to think of other types of magic as well. He tried to think of cool spells and stuff, and thought of teleportation. Izuku wondered if spatial magic exists, but then also started to think that if he needed to believe in someone to use said magic, who did he know that has spatial magic or teleportation magic? He knew of some villains that had spatial magic, like Kataguri, who always seemed to be nearby Shigaraki. And he also knew of Mr. Compress, that could compress down objects to a smaller degree. These two magics would be very useful, but Izuku didn't want to use villains in his incantations, so he decided against it as he tried to think of people with a spatial element, or someone that could use spatial magic. He was also thinking of multiple different types of quirk users that his friends had. Ida with his quirk engine legs, Denki with his electricity, and Todoroki with his fire and ice. Izuku realized that he could probably call upon his friends' names, or even some pro-hero names, to be able to use the quirks themselves. Izuku sighed, knowing that even though teleportation would be really cool to have right now, he really didn't know anyone with it. Then Izuku wondered if heroes and legends worked, could he use heroes from different themes, like video games and stuff? Then he started to think of people that had relationships to space and could teleport and other such things. Even though he really couldn't come up with anyone other than people such as Harry Potter, which really can't even teleport, Izuku sighed, trying to think of people that had the capability of space. And Izuku realized, while thinking about this, that he couldn't think of a single god that had a divinity related to space back where he came from. This kind of upset Izuku slightly because he realized that that could be a serious issue. If there was no way for him to realize how space works, then he can't really use it. Then Izuku started thinking through to multiple characters he saw in fiction, and remembered that there was this one character in a book that he had read a long time ago. He wasn't really a fan of the series, and it seems like the book series, the sequel of it, wasn't really as loved as much by their fans, but he had read it. And it had this character with purple eyes, and the eyes allowed him to teleport short distances. Deku couldn't remember the name of the person though, so he tossed it to the side for now, figuring that he would probably figure out someone else's name later on that he could use to believe in their abilities to teleport. Or, if worse comes to the worst, he could always use villain names and use villains and just use villain powers for good. Eventually, Izuku made it back to his tent. He had slain a couple of extra monsters and gained some power cores for himself. He then lay down in his bed and closed his eyes to drift off to sleep once again. And that's where we're going to leave it off, guys. Thank you so much for everything. I'll say this once again. By the time we probably let this go out, it will be at 1,000 subscribers, and I seriously can't thank you all enough for that. So until next time, guys, goodbye.